Hello, my friends, hello, and welcome once again to Stately Vaughan Manor, where Roger and I have returned for the Book of the Week. It's time for the Book of the Week, that fantastic program where Roger and I will just pick up some random book that's lying around here at the manor and talk about it. And today, we're going to be talking about a book written by the best writer that you aren't reading. Today, we're going to be talking about the Unabridged Jack London. This big brick of a book, the Unabridged Jack London, which was published by Courage Books, which was an imprint of Running Press. It's got a picture of Jack London there, looking very Jack London-like. So yeah, let's talk about this book, the Unabridged Jack London. So The Unabridged Jack London is still a book that you'll find fairly frequently floating around the used bookstores, along with its companion volumes. There were a bunch of these unabridged books, and they were published in these hardcover editions, but they were also published in big fat paperbacks. There was the Unabridged Mark Twain, the Unabridged Shakespeare, which I've got lying around here somewhere, and the Unabridged Edgar Allan Poe, which is the book that I don't see as often as I see the others. Very often I see the paperback editions of these. This one is not leather, it's just really cheap fake leather. Just cheapy vinyl. But usually I see the paperbacks floating around. And the thing about the paperbacks are, I've never seen one of these unabridged books that didn't have a broken spine. Usually they're broken in 2 or 3 spots because the way the paper is on these volumes, they're so thick that I guess when you open them at some point, they just like crack, you know. I'm sure there must be paperback editions out there that are just fine, but I've literally never seen them. The hardcovers are better if you could find them. And I really, really like this one. So Jack London, an author that I don't hear talked about that much anymore. I don't think very many people read Jack London anymore, with the possible exceptions of White Fang and Call of the Wild. Every once in a while, you'll hear about the Sea Wolf, but not very often. At least if you look on BookTube, you don't see too much of Jack. You don't see too many Jack London books talked about, and he wrote a lot. And Jack London at one time was a celebrity. He was a celebrity author. So this is a guy who got involved in the Klondike Gold Rush and didn't get a lot of gold, but he did get a lot of experience, which proved to be more valuable, really, as a writer. And as a writer, he was great. Jack London is just such a great writer, such a talent. And he took his experiences and put them all into his stories. And he wrote a lot of stories. A lot. And he wrote his fair share of books, and he wrote all kinds of different things. He wrote stories that could be called science fiction now, a lot of adventure stories, sports stories, social writing. He wrote all kinds of stuff, but like I said, you don't hear about any of that stuff. Now, this particular book is wonderful because it packs so much into it. There's just so much Jack London in this book. And he is just such a riveting writer, tremendously influential. I think when I first started reading Jack London, which was years ago, I was out of high school. I avoided reading Jack London in high school because I had the idea that Jack London was a writer that was kind of like a writer of kids' stories, and I got this idea because of, different Disney versions of like White Fang and Call of the Wild, those kinds of movies that you'd see. And so I just had that idea in my head. He writes kids' stories about dogs. Come on, I'm not going to read that. Well, I was very wrong. which I learned when I finally read Call of the Wild and realized, wow, this is not written for kids. He wrote fantastic stories, but they were stories about survival very often. And survival is a serious business. For example, in his story, the one story you hear talked about, the one short story you hear talked about that Jack London wrote was To Build a Fire. You always hear about that story. And in that story, of course, it was all about building a fire, because if you didn't, you're dead. You have to build a fire in that environment, or you will die. I mean, that's how rough the wilderness is, or can be during the wintertime that he was writing about. And it can be intense stuff. And this particular book has a ton in it. It is divided up into two sections. As far as the text goes, it says, in an attempt to preserve each of these works by Jack London as they originally appeared in print, we have followed the spelling and punctuation as first given in each story and novel. So it says here, the first decade of the 20th century was a period during which the presentation of our language was in flux. There were a great many rules concerning spelling and punctuation, but there was no single authority. And so what this book does is it tries to preserve the writing of Jack London as he wrote it, which is really, really valuable. This kind of thing is particularly valuable now when publishers just don't care about how texts were when they were originally written. Nowadays, you've got a plethora of censored editions of different writers floating around, which can make you, it makes me a little distrustful of a lot of modern publishers. But this particular edition, they made a real effort to present the fiction as it was written, and there's a lot of it. So this has a lot of Jack London books packed in here. It has part one, the Yukon, and part two is the sea. Part two is much smaller. So in part one, we've got a lot of his collections of short stories. We don't have all of them, of course, but we got a lot in here. We've got The Son of the Wolf, The God of His Fathers, Children of the Frost. These are all books you've never heard of. Then we have one you've heard of. We've got White Fang is in here. Then The Faith of Men is in here. We've got Uncollected Stories and Tales. And we've got Call of the Wild. Those are all stories in the Yukon section. And there's a lot of stories in here. And you probably haven't read them, and they're great. These are such good stories. I want to emphasize just how good this writer is, because I think it's a shame people don't read him. I mean, he was a major influence on so many writers, including my favorite writer of all time, Robert E. Howard, and my other favorite writer, Edgar Rice Burroughs. I mean, he's got a lot of talent, this guy, and his stories are fantastic. In part two, The Sea, we have The Sea Wolf, which is a really, really good book. Pretty intense book at times. Then we've got Tales of the Fish Patrol. Tales of the Fish Patrol, which is a book on its own I have never seen on its own. It must be out there somewhere. Of course, we live in a time where you can get everything Jack London wrote, I believe, electronically, probably for free. You could probably find in fact, I'm almost certain you could find all of these on Project Gutenberg. And I strongly recommend you do check out Jack London and check out some of those stories and books that you've never heard of and have not read. And if you ever find this, it's such a great book. I mean, it is very big, it is very thick, and the pages are a bit stiff, which is why, the paperback editions crack into pieces when you read them. But if you could find one of these hardcovers, they're just fantastic. And I would say that about any of the unabridged books. If you could find them lying around in hardcover, unabridged Poe, unabridged Shakespeare, pick those up. They're worth having. I mean, I have had this book for years and years. I probably had it 20 something years. I don't remember. And I picked it up used. And I've read through this many times. And so it holds up. The hardcover, the paperback would, be, all cracked to pieces. But the hardcover holds up, and I do recommend it. And I strongly, strongly, strongly recommend anything by Jack London. Like I said, such a great writer that I think people should probably read. That's my opinion anyway. So there you go, Jack London. Have anything to add, Roger? Roger is oddly silent. Moody guy. Okay, I will catch you next time.